Welcome to another episode of How I'm Building This, where we interview startup founders that are in the thick of building their businesses. We learn from their mistakes and get practical tips on overcoming our challenges. Today we have JJ from OnLoop. Hey JJ, how are you? Thank you so much for joining.
Hey Prateek, thank you for having me.
Of course, thanks. JJ, before we jump into OnLoop, I'd love to learn, who is JJ? Where did you grow up? And what really got you into strategy and planning?
So I don't know how to define myself in one sentence. So I'll skip that first sentence, and maybe by the end of it, people will come to their own conclusions. I grew up in India until I was 17, before I initially left to move to Singapore for college. I call Singapore home today. I'm a proud naturalized Singaporean, but sort of have lived around the world. And strategy and planning is an interesting sort of definition of what we do. But I started my career in strategy consulting at Accenture out of undergrad. So I studied business and information systems at undergrad. I almost became a software developer at Merrill Lynch. And a Tiger Woods poster on the halls of my university led me to a workshop at Accenture that led me to management consulting and strategy. So I guess Tiger Woods is the short answer.
That's awesome. Do you remember what that poster was?
It says, come experience the Accenture experience.
Oh, wow.
And like, I was a Tiger Woods fan, and I'd heard of a company called Accenture, and I thought they did tech consulting. I actually didn't know they do strategy consulting. And I was about to go take a job as a software engineer. I'm like, well, maybe if I'm on the revenue generating side versus the cost generating side, that might be a better idea. And so that's what led me to Accenture, and that led to strategy.
That's amazing. Wow. So Anne is your co-founder. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Where did you meet her, and how did you decide that that she was the right person to build a business with?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we actually knew each other during my time at Stanford Business School. So her partner at the time was in my business school class, and that's how I got to know her. And then when I lived in New York for a couple of years post business school, we were very good friends. And when I left Uber and was in the early stages of figuring out what we really wanted to do, we knew that we wanted to focus on the US as a core market. And in April of 2020, the world shut down. Right. So, and I was in Singapore. And I'd spoken to Annie a few months prior on her sort of setting up a go-to-market consulting company for early stage startups. And so we were talking to someone else who was giving us a proposal to do market research in the US. And I remembered Annie sort of doing early stage go-to-market work. And I called her to talk about what we were doing. And one thing led to another.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Wow. I saw that on Crunchbase that you all have raised some money. How did you decide that these were the investors that you really wanted to partner up with?
So I think a couple of things. One is we decided to raise money right from the get-go in order to stay focused on building a software company. I think one of the sort of early decisions that every sort of mission-oriented founder has is, in order to go about solving the problem you want to solve, do you sort of build a product company or do you build a services company? And actually, in the early days of building any company, it's much more profitable building a services company or a software company. And we knew that in order for us to stay focused on building product, it made sense to be venture backed. When you're first starting out, you don't actually know who the right partners are, right? That's the truth, right? And frankly, when I met our first institutional investor, Square Peg, I was in the midst of raising a small pre-seed round, um, and you know, we got introduced to the founder of the fund, a guy named Paul Bassett in Australia, and he and I just clicked, and he had built a recruiting SaaS company called Seek in Australia, which was the first ever um, unicorn in Australia, and we just had a lot of conviction around what we were doing. And just felt like a high conviction investor, and that was quite rare. And I was pretty keen to learn from him and be in the trenches.
That's amazing. How many investors did you all sort of go through prior to deciding to work with these folks?
I think the first time I raised capital, I probably did upwards of 70 plus calls.
Wow.
And there's a variety of like individuals and funds. I'm fundraising now, and it's a whole lot harder than it was in 2020. And so any founder who's raised money in 2020 and 2021 now realizes those were actually very, very easy years to raise money. It is significantly harder to raise money today than it was back then. And I think that very much like dating, I think fundraising is a numbers game. And I think that a lot of founders early on take money from the first set of people who offer them money is the reality. But I think founder investor fit is important, and founder investor fit doesn't get spoken about quite as much as product market fit and other aspects of startup building. But I think who you take money from ends up dictating a lot in terms of what company you end up building. And I think it is something that founders should think more about. And I think that if you take money from places that are misaligned with what you want to build, it just leads to issues later on, or you end up being in a position where you just don't like the company you're building. And the last thing you want as a founder is to like not like your day-to-day. Sure, it's going to be tough, but there should be a level of joy around serving whatever mission you want to serve, and staying aligned to that, and having investors who are aligned to the mission of the specific founding team, I think is very important.
Makes sense. Well, JJ, on your website, you say turn every manager into a great manager. What is the pain that you're solving, and for whom?
Have you managed teams before?
Yep.
What has that experience been like?
The first time that I managed teams, it was very, very interesting. I clearly had no clue what I was doing. It was one of those like very, very typical situations where a good sales rep got promoted as a manager, became the manager. I'm like, holy shit! Like, what am I supposed to be doing now?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the first experience wasn't the best, and then of course over time, that you learn, and hopefully you get better.
That is the exact pain point we solve.
That's amazing.
And we don't think being a manager should be rocket science. And there are actually, in the same way that if you're trying to lose weight, right, there's a set of things that you do, right? And in the same way, if you want to be a good manager, there's a set of things that you do. The problem is that most management and leadership literature and solutioning has been done by consultants. So people who are selling frameworks or selling approaches or selling methodologies. And inherently, for people who sell consulting, there is a desire to complexify.
Yep.
Versus if you build product, there's a desire to simplify, right? And essentially what we do is demystify the jobs of a manager into measuring and understanding each person's energy, being very clear about their goals in terms of targets, projects, and skills, ensuring a sufficient amount of feedback, both from a celebrate and improve perspective, and ensuring continuous growth. And that is a set of 5 hierarchical needs that every manager needs to drive. And that's basically what you need to do for every direct report every week in, week out. And different direct reports will have needs in various places on that hierarchy. And the goal is to always start from the bottom and not go upwards until it feels fine. So if someone's really not motivated to show up to work, nothing else matters. Right? And that comes first. And then the second is, does the person really understand what they are after and what success looks like? And actually, in most organizations, that is completely lacking at the individual level. People understand what needs to be achieved at an organizational level, but that very rarely trickles down successfully down to each individual. And that's because frameworks like OKRs have been defined for defining business outcomes, not individual outcomes and goals. And so companies have these beautiful strategy documents, and then they go nowhere because it doesn't cascade effectively. And what we tell people is those 2 things are the base performance layers. If someone's a low performer, don't give them improved feedback. It's not going to do anything. It's just going to make things worse. Improved feedback is actually more for high performers than low performers, but people do the opposite. They give high performers no improved feedback, and they give low performers a ton of improved feedback. But actually supposed to do the other way around. And that's why most managers screw up, because they don't know where to go up and down that chain. And we actually believe a lot of that can be just done by AI in the next few years. And so we tell people we're both a manager co-pilot for managers to use AI effectively to run the teams. And for orgs that can't develop managers for whatever reasons, we'll give them AI managers as manager autopilots. And that's about running the right cadences across that chain to do it the right way. And then you can give senior managers large spans of control of 15 to 20 so they can solve the tough problems. So in the same way that with customer support, we talk so much about how AI can do level 1, level 2. Level 1, level 2 management can be done by AI too, right? And then L3 management can be done by a human, right? And that's exactly what we're focused on.
That's interesting. What got you to be so passionate about helping managers grow?
Yeah, listen, I think the vision of our company is how do you help knowledge workers achieve their full potential, right? And we will build multiple businesses in the next 30 years around that vision. In my experience as a manager and leader of large orgs, the tools and approaches that I was subject to as a manager were abysmal. And so I just had a lot of deep personal pain and a lot of deep empathy around the manager experience. And I saw solving the manager experience as a core way of driving business ROI. And the biggest mistake we've made is that we've confused people management with HR, right? So we call managing people HR, but managing people has nothing to do with HR.
Nothing to do, yeah.
And goals and feedback done right create real ROI in businesses, which have been massively underserved while people have built CRM and sales tools, because that more directly affects top line. But actually what affects top line more than anything else is, are your people motivated, productive, and growing? Nothing affects top line and bottom line more than that. But it's been bastardized by crappy HR products that have made goals and feedback things that people hate and run away from. And that's just criminal. And it robs businesses and people of core productivity. And so I'm a pretty hard-charging business leader, but ultimately it's about how do we solve things from first principles.
Yep.
And for most tech companies and most services businesses, people are the biggest cost item in the P&L. And they do fuck all for optimizing it.
I see that. So is there like a particular function that you're initially, focused on?
Good question. So we typically sell to 3 or 4 core personas. So we'll typically sell to a founder CEO if an organization is sort of under 100 to 150. Or it's an MD or a GM of a business unit.
Okay.
That sort of operate a particular part of the business. This is often the case in creative agencies and other services businesses. 3, it's a COO or a VP of ops. And sometimes it's sort of strategy and finance. Our basic tenet is anybody who runs an org of 50 plus people themselves is a potential customer, not someone who is providing a proxy for a larger org, right? Because we believe that we've got to perform surgery on the org, and you can't perform surgery by doing surgery on someone else, right? So and the person who has the pain is the person running the organization. Sometimes that could be a function. We spend a lot of time working with the supply chain org at Beyond Meat, for instance, when they were going through a lot of change as an org. And so those are cases in which we'll work with functions. But typically we find whoever owns the P&L or is sort of driving operations and has the word operations in their title ends up being sort of most attuned to the problem space and has solving manager and individual productivity as one of the top 3 problems to solve. Because you probably do B2B sales and you notice that people telling you they have a problem is not good enough unless it's one of the top 3 problems. They're not going to do anything about it. And the biggest mistake founders make is ask people, do you have this problem? And then when 10 people say yes, they go and try and solve it, and then nobody buys the product. They're like, wait, but all of you all told us it's a problem. We said it's a problem. We didn't say that we were staying up at night trying to solve it. And so and there's a core difference there.
That's for sure. So JJ, I mean, how did you all go about getting your like first few customers that were willing to pay you to solve their problem?
Both our first 2 customers that offered us to pay money came through cold inbound. Both of them. The first had heard about us because I had posted about what we were doing on LinkedIn, and I'd never met this person. It was a company called Ultra Super New in Singapore. And the other is Dolby Labs in San Francisco that read about us from a sort of thought leadership piece that one of our investors did. Those were the first 2 paying customers. We did a bunch of pilots and sort of product design roundtables with leaders that we knew in our broader extended network. I differentiate between people who pay for your product versus people who help you consult and build. And people confuse that sometimes. People who don't pay you are not customers. And putting logos on your website of free users should be illegal, actually, at some point. So if someone actually pays you money, you should have put the logo on your website. But everybody has Google, Uber, Meta on their logo because some person from that company signed in through a self-serve link. So now that logo goes on their website. And they're not customers. But one mistake I think founders often make in B2B is to go to friends. I think it's completely wrong. And you should acquire all your early customers through cold outbound and cold inbound, because that's the only way you get punched in the face and you learn. And you just learn faster. And actually in B2B, friends don't really buy products because it's like their business after all, right? Or it's their business or it's their job, and they're not going to introduce some friend's product. They'll buy your shampoo for a birthday gift, right? Like if you run a shampoo company, like they're not going to bring you into their workspace if the product's not great. So the friends thing doesn't work that much either, and waste time because they'll take the call. People don't know, you'll just say, no, I'm not interested, right? So the best way to actually build go-to-market is just to go to strangers. And you know whether you have something real or not.
You are speaking of the choir, so prior to me building Activated Scale, and I know this is a bit extreme, but I did not reach out to any of my friends, none of my family. They knew that I was doing or thinking of doing something. I essentially sent out cold emails, and I still remember, I think I sent out close to 6,000
Yeah.
cold emails, something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
to every freaking founder that I could find on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
requested an interview, and I think I spoke with 123 or 124 founders, something like that. I was literally just questioning, nothing else. And yes,
Yeah.
from those interviews, sure, some of them turned into paying customers, which was not expected.
Right.
But that being said, that's essentially what I did till I could get to a point where I'm like, okay, is this pain really worth solving?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yes, I mean, man, going cold is the best thing that I have ever done, and I've tried to build 3 or 4 times before this, and that was the same bullshit, friends, family, hey, what, like, who do you know there? And obviously friends and family love you, so they're going to be extremely kind to you and will give you the greatest feedback possible. And the second that you build stuff, they're like, yeah, dude, thank you, this is looking great.
Yeah, correct.
That's what
Correct.
about stuff.
It's really interesting.
Absolutely.
And I think, but I think people just don't know better, right? Like, and I think founders are generally sort of optimistic people. Like one of my investors, Shian, she talks about, founders are just most optimistic people that ever exist, right? Like, and so like, but I think that once you don't need the world's validation to figure out that you're capable or let you sleep at night, you just end up being better because you just become more ruthless at doing stuff.
Yeah.
And I think for me, one of the hardest transitions going from employee to founder was like just failing so much. Like when you're like a pretty good employee, you don't fail that much, right? Just like it's not something you're used to, and you might be the world's best entrepreneur, but you're gonna fail 50% of the time.
Yep.
And how, like, if half the things you're doing are working, that's amazing, right? And it's usually 90% of the things that you do don't work. And when you work in like strategy functions, you're like paid to see around corners and to predict how things will go. That's the other thing that doesn't work in entrepreneurship, where all the things you expect to work don't work, and the things that you don't expect to work. So all you can do is just keep doing stuff. And that's the only thing that's under your control. And that's such an alien concept when you come from larger companies and you're paid to have a point of view on what might work. And it's just like very interesting. And you just like fail so many times. And frankly, like you don't stop. Like even Jensen Huang today, like I think the world makes him out to be a superstar. I'm sure in a day, like 50% of things that NVIDIA are doing are not working.
Yeah.
Right. But you just get used to it. And that just takes time.
Yeah. So you said that you got your first 2 customers rather through, of course, inbound. So today, how are customers finding out about you?
Yeah. So actually, what we found is that inbound customers tend to be actually not great customers.
Huh.
So on average, our inbound customers have lower ACVs and higher churn. And our referral customers have the highest ACVs and the lowest churn. And outbound in the middle. And that's because often, because we build a horizontal product, there's a lot of people to whom our product speaks to, right? Like they resonate with what we solve, but are not necessarily sitting in a place that provide the perfect conditions for us to build a good business, right? So the only customers that are profitable for us are 100+ person companies.
Okay.
And 10K plus ACVs. And that's the reality of any software business, unless you're spending millions of dollars on customer acquisition in a very leaky market, right? But if you're doing sort of sales-led, which is 99% of software companies, it's usually 5-digit ACVs, and it's usually a little bit more stable organizations that are not fighting so much, right? The number of our customers that are between 0 and 60 people that are just like shut down or have bad years, like, like there's a bunch of that that also happens where you just have sort of, involuntary churn because you can't do anything about it. But then it looks like churn for you, right? Like, and so, but we retain 70% of all customers that are above 10K in ACV. I actually just did analysis today. So we acquired 52 customers in a lifetime. And so there's enough of a sample set to now do the analysis. And like, I didn't do a bunch of analysis early on because it didn't matter, right? Like you have 5 customers, there's no pattern recognition, right? Like, and so there's no point looking at it. But I'm actually very, very bullish on outbound, and I remain very bullish on outbound. I think the channels to do outbound are changing, right? So today, LinkedIn's a lot better to do outbound on than email.
Yeah.
Cold calling still works in the US, especially if the person's heard of you. So if you've sent someone a LinkedIn connection request and accepted, the cold call after that works. Like, hey, really great to connect. Like, I just want to check in to make sure you at least understood what we can help you with, right? And then the person's like, okay, like it's not a complete stranger. If someone's never heard of you, that cold call did not work. And then deliver to people who you have high conviction around, delivering even a handwritten note in the mail,
Yeah.
or a small gift, or getting a warm intro from someone else. Those are all forms of outbound. So what drives me nuts is all people need to be like, outbound is dead. I'm like, no, man, email is dead. Outbound is not dead. And outbound is never going to be dead.
Yeah.
Right? And so, and there's so much like garbage that gets on LinkedIn around like startup stuff and like GTM stuff that it's like very annoying. But what outbound does is that because we now know the types of customers that I can look at their LinkedIn profile and be like, this person will get it and will be successful with. And so you can just get a lot more targeted versus with inbound, you just don't know who shows up at your door. And when you're an early stage company, you want to serve everybody, right? Someone comes and says, I have a problem. Can you fix it? You're like, yeah, I'm a general physician, right? Like, I'll solve your ailment. But the reality is like the doctors who make the most money are super specialized doctors who do one form of surgery on one form of patient and like know that inside out, right? And what outbound lets you do is become a specialized surgeon versus be a general practitioner.
Yeah. So you said, JJ, that like there are still outbound channels that of course continue to work, and then you mentioned email is dead. What are some of the channels that you're
like super weak response rates, right?
Oh yeah,
like,
for sure.
Open rates and reply rates are just very, very low.
Yeah,
and then you
sure.
just
spring. Yeah. So are you then like essentially, connecting and then sending voice notes? Is that some of the methods? I mean, like
connections and then a sequence.
Okay.
And there are products like Dripify, Link Express, etc., that are very similar to the email sequencing tools.
Yeah.
That are multiple sequences on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And then ideally, that's then getting managed in a multi-channel way, right? So you're running some sort of a variation of an Agogi sequence that's sort of multi-channel and is following up on different channels to people until you get a yes or no.
Yeah.
It's not the thing with outbound is it just requires so much discipline, and early stage startups are the opposites of discipline machine. But it's not complicated, right? Like that's what all the Indian SaaS companies have really they've really nailed outbound because they've like just brute forced it, right? Like there's a bunch of SaaS companies in Chennai, like they just know how to throw bodies at the GTM problem, and just build well priced, good economics machinery to drive customer acquisition in the US.
Very cool. JJ, I mean, all of us have, of course, made a ton of mistakes.
Yes,
especially as founders, and like you spoke about it here. But what are some of the mistakes that you've made that you wish now, looking back, you hadn't really done?
I mean, listen, I would do everything differently if I started. Like that's the reality of it, right? Like, and we have a different CTO than we started. We've re-platformed once, right? We think about sort of the right composition of investors all the time, right? Like, we think about US versus APAC, we think about software versus service. Like there's so many different factors you think about, and the reality is that, the more times you do it, the more refined you get, and then you make new mistakes, right? So you never stop at it. But I think the biggest thing is, I think that in my life, I have optimized for serendipity over discipline, right? So I feel like there's two ways to be successful, right? And everybody is successful through some combination of serendipity and discipline. And my wife is much more on the discipline side of the spectrum, and I'm much more on the serendipity side of the spectrum. And that's why, we try and see that as a feature, not a bug. And because the right answer is always a combination of both done the right way, right? Yep. You can either bicker over it about it being different, or you can synergize it to get sort of the best of both worlds. I think one of the things is I continuously in life, and I think as I go on to solve bigger problems and do larger things, doing upfront planning well and being disciplined and having structure is such a superpower.
Oh, for sure.
And I don't have it in a way that I like to, right? And so I think that doing fewer things in a focused manner, and sort of doing it with high conviction is very, very helpful versus sort of being scattered. And knowing how to pick the right CTO, knowing how to pick the right individuals, venture fund. Like there's so many different pieces to it, that continuously get nuanced and get finessed, as you do it. And frankly, I hope I have the opportunity to be a builder for the next 30 years, either in technology or as a fund or in government or whatever format that makes the most sense. But I hope to keep making mistakes. But the thing is, there is no way to learn without doing it.
Sure.
I think the world's best CEOs become the world's best CEOs by not giving up. And the only thing you can do is develop the grit and resilience to not give up and to continuously, incrementally pivot your mindset, skill set, capability, ideas, view of the world more and more in the right direction. And it's daily iteration. And just having the stamina to keep doing that.
Yeah. Talk about stamina, JJ, like, one of the things that is not really spoken about that often is about founder mental health. Mm-hmm. What do you do to keep your mental health in check?
So I'm a clinical anxiety patient. I've been on anxiety meds the last 18 months. I've been in and out of therapy for over 2 years. And I think that I think mental health is the wrong way to think about it, because people see it as a disease. The best way I put it is that if you want to climb Mount Everest and you don't train, you literally are going to die. Like you won't survive it, right? But people take on Herculean mental tasks like trying to build very large companies very quickly without fitness and without training. And that can then literally kill you in other ways, right? So I see having a therapist, having a coach, having a psychiatrist as essentially having a core team to make me fit to be on the journey. And any founder who doesn't have a CEO coach is just wrong, right? It's like, have you heard any tennis player in the world doesn't have a coach? Like, how can you be a professional athlete and not have a coach? Now, it's not a terrible coaches, so don't get a bad coach. Like don't become a tennis player and get a badminton coach, right? Like that's not a good idea.
Yeah.
But get a CEO coach who's been a CEO or is a current CEO. And then, my healthy ways to do it well is to exercise. My unhealthy ways is red wine. So it depends on how you cope with it.
Sure.
But my biggest coping mechanism is that I have a fantastic wife, and that's a support system that lives around me. And so I think there are many ways, and I think I call it mental fitness, and I didn't come up with it. Other people talk about it. I don't like the term mental health because it makes it sound like you're sick. And if you're taking on any sort of large challenge, it's about building fitness, and no human being has the fitness to deal with the level of chronic stress that comes with being an entrepreneur for a very long time. And if you don't particularly train for it, it's going to show up in many ways that are going to be detrimental to emotional, physical, social, financial health. And that's a problem.
Yeah. So that's that though. What advice do you have for aspiring founders
From a mental fitness,
physical, just thinking about building what they hope to be the next big thing?
I think my biggest piece of advice is knowing that it's going to be very painful, and knowing and asking yourself very honestly, do you have the conditions for pain tolerance to do it, right? Part of why we live in Singapore, although we're building a US software company, is because we have help at home.
Got it.
And we have a 12-week-old child, and the only way I get to work 16 hours a day is because we have help and we have grandparents nearby, and that practically works. So when you're a founder in your late 30s, you can't just throw caution to the wind and sleep on people's couch and eat ramen, right? So they're like realities of life that need to exist for you to be able to do hard things for a very long time. And so I think it's right. And then the thing that gets you through tough times is mission orientation and the people around you. And if you want to build anything consequential, shit's going to go south at some point. And if you don't have a strong mission orientation and not around the right people, you do blow up and flame out. And so I think the conditions for long-term success in entrepreneurship are very tangible. And my advice would be to go with it with your eyes open and make sure you have the right sort of impact padding around you in the right way to go through the fact that you get punched in the face at it.
Very interesting. JJ, this has been so much fun chatting with you. How can folks keep up with you and with OnLoop?
So I'm generally on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
And I now treat LinkedIn as a muse pad. So I post several times a day on random things that come up for me, and I respond to every message that comes through my LinkedIn mailbox. I look at them. I don't always respond, certainly. So I will read everything that comes to me. So listening. I mean, I love hearing from listeners, and some things to record. If you disagree, if you have a point of view, I'd love to hear from folks.
Amazing. JJ, thanks so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.